The relationship between food and religion or spiritual practice is intrinsic and old. For thousands of years, mankind has associated the consumption of foods with both humiliating catastrophes as well as swaggering apotheosis. Eating is life-sustaining. The absence of food brings us closer to death the longer we forsake it. So an intuitive connection between the vivifying nourishment of food and the quickening spirit of ancient gods makes a lot of sense. What I found in study is that there is an apparent disconnect between Asian, the Middle Eastern philosophies, and the Europeans regarding food. While the Greeks conceptualized a vital force or spiritual essence of the world called the anima mundi, which is like the Hindu Brahman Atman or Taoist Chi, this connective spiritual essence between things, it was only the Eastern religions that sought to undergird dietary practices with it. Meanwhile, Greeks would consume the very guts of animals, and we all know of Roman gluttony. Different again, the Jews and later Muslims would only eat certain foods, but this was just as edicts from God, so there's this contrasting between the diets of the apostolic Europeans, the God-fearing Middle Easterners, and the dharmic Asians. Even Confucius gets in on this. He prescribes how food should be chopped into small pieces, and that the mixing of ingredients and condiments should be really harmonious, because that was a philosophical principle that was important to him. Meat should be consumed in moderation and well cooked. Bad smelling food should be avoided, and you should only eat 7/10 of your fill, and always practice good hygiene. And you should always invite your friends over, because friends and food are inseparable parts of life. So clearly Confucius was concerned with well-being when he offered these insights. We can understand the philosophical underpinnings with perfect clarity. Some of the oldest spiritual diets come from India, where the most spiritual leaders forbid and some outright ban the consumption of meat. 30% of India's 1.2 billion population practices lacto-vegetarianism. In 2002, India's per capita meat consumption was 5.2 kilograms compared to the USA's 125 kilograms. Mind you, that was nearly 20 years ago, and meat consumption has increased in both countries since then. Dharmic tradition seeks to live harmoniously with the spirit. For them, a virtuous life includes vegetarianism. Hinduism, Jainism and Buddhism all see the righteousness of it. However, Jainism goes furthest with its implementation. For the Jain, the championship of non-injury is consistently brought to bear in their lives. For them, to eat meat, fish or eggs is to indirectly support killing or injury, and so is considered an endorsement of violence called himsa. This in turn produces harmful reaction karma. A key phrase in their philosophy is Hansa Paramo Dharma, a non-violence edict, and it's indispensable for them as it's an essential element for the liberation from the cycle of reincarnation. This adoption of asceticism expresses itself in some novel ways. Jains do not eat food stored overnight, as it may possess a higher number of microorganisms such as bacteria. For this reason, yogurt's off the menu for them. Indeed, root vegetables are off the menu too, as they're considered anathkai, which means one body containing infinite lives. Also, microorganisms in the soil could be injured in the harvesting process. And more, the whole plant dies when you extract and eat a root vegetable. Another way to describe this diet is Sattvic, meaning eating habits that are pure, essential, honest and wise. In Eastern culture, you might also come across Rajasic foods, sentient foods, and static foods. The Rajasic foods are not considered beneficial, but they're not ruled out either. These foods could be garlic, hot chilies, or red meat. They believe these foods can cause aggression and dominating thoughts. Sentient foods are stimulants, such as those high in salt or caffeine. They're said to stimulate the navel level chakras, but not any higher. Finally, static foods are those with sedentary effects that dull your state of consciousness. These are not considered good choices. However, in times of suffering, they can be used to help healing. These foods include alcohol, mushrooms, opium, and are said to stimulate the lower two chakras. As with Confucius, the idea of moderate eating is promoted with a concept here known as matara. In Islam, it is the law that prescribes what is qualified as halal, which is lawful to eat. The opposite is haram, which is unlawful to eat. These are derived from the commandments found in the Quran, the Holy Book of Islam, as well as the Hadith and Sunnah. According to the Quran, the only foods explicitly forbidden are meat from animals that die of themselves, blood, the meat of pigs, and any food dedicated to another god. However, a person would not be guilty of sin in a situation where the lack of any alternative creates an undesired necessity to consume that which is otherwise unlawful. This is the law of necessity in Islamic jurisprudence. That which is necessary makes the forbidden permissible. We saw concessions in the Dharmic tradition, but unlike those Asian traditions, the Middle Eastern one lacks rhyme or reason. There's no commitment to non-injury or elegant higher path, just what appears to be inexplicable commands from God. In mainstream Nicene Christianity, there are no restrictions on kinds of animals that can be eaten. Some Christians will contest this. However, as an assessment of the mainstream, so it is. In the scriptures, Christians are told not to consume foods knowingly offered to pagan gods, a tradition upheld by the early church fathers Clement of Alexandria and Origen. The Bible stipulates that we should abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, and from the meat of strangled animals. It's customary for Christians to bless their food before eating it with a mealtime prayer as a sign of thanks to God for the meal that they have. Armenian apostolic churches, among other Orthodox Christians, have rituals that display obvious links to Jewish kosher slaughter called shechita. In the New Testament, Paul of Tarsus notes that some devout Christians may wish to abstain from consuming meat that's been offered to idols if it causes a brother to stumble in his faith. For that reason, Christian monks called Trappists, among others, have adopted a policy of Christian vegetarianism. Some Christians insist that kosher dietary regulations are commanded of God for Christians. However, this is an idea that's contested. Kosher foods are described in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. These are foods that conform to halakha law. Food that conforms to halakha law is considered fit for consumption. Foods that are not compatible with the law are called treif, meaning torn. Animals that chew their cud and have cloven hooves are on the menu. Pigs, for example, do not make the cut, only having cloven hooves. Flying animals such as birds of prey, fish-eating water birds and bats are off the menu too. Monkfish is off due to its lack of scales, along with shellfish. Seaweed and kelp run the risk of contamination by microscopic, non-kosher crustaceans. Creeping things like mice and lizards are out too. Most bugs are out, except locust varieties. A shochet, the person who slaughters the animals or does the shechita, must do so appropriately, as an inhumane slaughter would make the food treif. Only the Kohen or priests are permitted to eat the cheek of an animal, unless they grant permission. The consumption of blood is not allowed. However, rabbis noticed the impracticality of this rule, discriminating between that blood which remains inside meat and that which runs off, such as like arterial and stuff. They also permit the blood of fish and locusts. Ultimately, the laws of kashrut can be broken for pekuach nefesh, and that means the preservation of human life. For example, a patient is allowed to eat non-kosher food if it is essential for recovery, where a person would otherwise starve. As well known as the kosher diet is, there isn't any justification for it. What are the reasons underlying kosher eating? Some have posited that God was selecting foods that limit risk to health and maintain longevity. This means the kashrut was health-orientated. Similarly, there is the reason that in insanitary times, these laws helped with maintaining freshness. If these reasons are true, Jews could happily abandon the kashrut, as we have better means now, and so changing with the times would be more pleasing to God if indeed the modus operandi was helping with hygiene and health. In actual fact, there is and has only ever been one reason to keep the kashrut. You shall sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I, the Lord, am holy. From this perspective, it can be seen that these eating habits reinforce a set-apartness. Hebrew culture is different. Each meal is a chance to rededicate yourself to the standard of Jewish living and behaviour. This regular repetition and frequent exposure to Jewish custom creates a cycle of reproduction, maintaining values for generations. It reinforces living in covenant with God and commitment to the values of Torah. I'm going to get into this in my next video. I have criticisms of the romantically magnetising Jane with all their spiritual non-injury, care extended to the most minute of organisms via their Sattvic commitment. I also have criticisms toward the rich and symbolic traditions of the Kosher diet.